Let's take a few minutes to walk through your final part of your diet project. This part is all about your risk for the diet-related chronic diseases, such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, hypertension, osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes, etc. And in this part, I'd like you to think about how your intake of specific foods and nutrients and food groups compare with each one of the recommendations for preventing any of the top of the three diet-related chronic diseases listed here. What I want you to focus on in this part of the project is the recommendations, the specific recommendations for each different type of disease and how your specific intake compares. I understand that there are a lot of similarities between the recommendations for lowering your risk for hypertension and heart disease and type 2 diabetes. So I don't want you to give me any sweeping statements that say, I eat plenty of this, and therefore I'm not at risk of anything. No, that's not what I want you to do here. I want you to discuss each disease separately and how your specific intake compares with each of the specific recommendations listed for each of those diseases. And tell us whether you're getting enough or not enough from each of these foods that are recommended. Perhaps you are meeting your needs. If you're not, how many more servings do you need to take in? What could you do to change your diet to better meet your needs? So I want you to refer back to part 1 of your diet project, all the data that you collected there. I want you to consider your intake from each of the food groups. How many grains are you getting? How many servings from the vegetable, fruit, and fruit group are you getting, etc. Where are most of your calories coming from? Are most of them coming from fat or the other two macronutrients? And if a lot of them are coming from fat, what are the specific type of fats that are predominant in your diet? Are you getting too much saturated fat or not enough of the unsaturated fats? What about your cholesterol, in particular your fiber intake? So consider that as well, and your micronutrient intake. For some of these recommendations, specifically for osteoporosis, it's specific to your intake of calcium and vitamin D. Are you meeting those recommended needs? And how does that relate to your risk? So let me walk you through one of these. For example, say you're considering your risk for hypertension. You would look at the recommendations for the DASH eating plan. And here you've got a nice chart that shows you, well, if you're consuming within the 1,800 to 2,000 calorie range diet, it tells you how many recommended servings from each of these food groups that this particular diet or eating pattern recommends. So are you getting 6 servings of grains? Are you meeting the recommended 4 to 5 servings from each of the fruits and vegetable group or not? How would you, do you need just one more of each serving or one more serving from each group? What would you consider adding to meet that needs? Are your dairy products fat-free or low-fat? Are you getting enough from each of those? Are you exceeding the maximum sodium limit per the DASH recommendations? And then if you're looking at a different set of recommendations, say you also want to compare your intake and relate it to your risk for cardiovascular disease, you would look at the American Heart Association eating pattern here that I've provided to you. And you would see, well, yes, there are a lot of similarities, but there are a couple of differences here. For example, at the very bottom, the sodium intake recommended for the American Heart Association is different than that from the DASH folks. So how does your intake compare with these specific recommendations? Other things that are different about the AHA guidelines, it has a specific recommendation for solid versus solid fats, which is a proxy for saturated fats versus unsaturated fats. Also has a specific recommendation for servings of fish per week and nuts per week. So think about that as well. And of course, if you have any questions or problems as you're going through this, please feel free to reach out. Have fun.